Hello everyone, welcome. Today I'll be presenting on the essay called State Terrorism and Rational Terror by Albert Camus. Now, Albert Camus is actually one of my favorite authors or philosophers. I've read his book The Stranger about 10 years ago, I think. It's been a long time. So it's a joy to come back to Albert Camus and make a presentation on him. Before I begin, I'd just like to remind everyone the class theme for today. It's political violence, war and revolution, justified or not. And this is important because I'll be tackling the essay based on this theme. Now, in his essay, Camus makes the case against indiscriminate political violence. He wants to limit the violence to conditions where there is no death penalty in the revolutionary state, the rebellion is against the tyrant, no mass murders, no murders of civilians, and only in situations where there is no alternative to killing. Why? Well, we'll get to that in a minute. And this essay, just saying, has to be read with Camus' overall philosophy to be truly understood. Especially, in particular, the myth of Sisyphus. I believe that it is a continuation of the myth of Sisyphus rather than a standalone piece on its own. I think you can't completely understand in its full value without going back at some of his earlier works. Now, for Camus, life is absurd. What's absurd? It means it either lacks meaning or that we cannot conceive the meaning. That means absurd for Camus. So, in that case, if life is meaningless, then why don't we commit suicide? Now, Sisyphus, in the story, is punished with climbing up a rock for all of his life, for all of his life. And every time he reaches the end point of the rock, of the mountain, the rock falls down and he has to climb again forever. It's a punishment. Not just saying he's actually referring to our 9 to 5 jobs here. But that's a side note. So it's a punishment. So that means that there is no end goal because he has to keep climbing again and again because the rock falls down. It's a punishment, but he has to keep climbing again, climbing up and again, and again. Just like how we go to our 9 to 5 works every day, and there's no end, which means that our lives are indeed without an end goal, without a defined end goal. So what do we do if our lives are without a defined end goal? Well, we have three options. 1. Fill in the gaps with God. So what Camus calls commit philosophical suicide. Believe in God. Number 2, and believing in God is committing philosophical suicide because you stop thinking. Now number 2 is to commit physical suicide. Still stop thinking, just escape the situation. And number 3, accept it and face it. Now, he goes with the third solution. Accept it. Now, we imagine Sisyphus is happy. Sisyphus revolts. And here is where the rebel or the rebellion subject is tackled in. By the way, the overall essay is called The Rebel, and the State Terrorism and Rational Terror by Albert Camus is a chapter within the overall essay, and the overall essay is over 200 pages. I think it's close to 300. Now, we accept it, and Sisyphus, we imagine, is happy. Sisyphus revolts, and thereby creates meaning in his absurd punishment. He revolts, and that revolt gives value to life. So remember this very well. This will become important in a bit. So one can either metaphysically revolt, and that means to protest against the absurd, or historically revolt, and that means to materialize the metaphysical rebellion in the physical world. Now, Sisyphus' rebellion is a rational rebellion since it is a revolt against absurdity. A communist rebellion is an example to a rational rebellion. Rebellions that are not against absurdity are irrational rebellions, such as Nazism. But even though a communist rebellion is a rational rebellion, i.e. against the absurd, and even though one can assume a communist rebellion is not option 1 or 2, so suicide, then why is Camus against it? Again, if we assume that if it's not a suicide, either physical or philosophical, and if we accept also that a communist rebellion is a rational rebellion, then why is Camus against it? And this is my first question. Feel free to pause the video here and discuss it, but remember that the video is only, the presentation is only at the halfway mark. So discuss it only if you have time. And I'm continuing now. Okay, I'm assuming you have discussed, hopefully. Now, it's a bit of a trick question. The answer is, in fact, it is a philosophical suicide. One might assume it's not, but it is, in fact, a philosophical suicide. Why? Because every kind of socialism is utopian, and every utopia replaces God. For the longest time, God has replaced the gap of the meaning of life. But when you take God out, then we struggle to find the meaning. Well, if we accept God to fill in the gaps, then we are only escaping from finding the solution. We are ignoring the problem. It is therefore philosophical suicide. It's simple, actually. Now, and yes, there is in fact a solution. It is to accept the reality and to revolt against it. Not for achieving a utopia, but solely as a reaction and as a rejection of the absurdity. But why not revolt for a utopia? What's the problem? After all, does a utopia not give us an alternative to the absurdity and get rid of the absurd? Is it not a victory? Is it not a solution? What's the issue here? Well, remember, every kind of socialism is utopian. And follow me carefully here, because it's a complex argument. Every kind of socialism is utopian. And every utopia replaces God by future. So it then replaces the future with ethics that only serve this particular future. And therefore, utopias are often coercive and oppressive. To quote Camus in his exact words, utopia replaces God by the future, then it proceeds to identify the future with ethics. The only values are those which serve this particular future. For that reason, utopias have almost always been coercive and authoritarian. Well, in short, what this means is when utopia replaces God, there are certain ethics that are created that serves a particular future, that serves a particular end, that results often in oppression and coercion. But here's the question. And why is authoritarianism and coercion inherently bad? Well, Camus answers, because to kill another human being is rejecting our own being, since we reject solidarity. What Camus calls the kingdom of humanity. Now, to quote Camus again on this, he says, "The city that planned to be the city of fraternity becomes an ant-heap of solitary man." And this refers to, this is at the end of the essay, this refers to Camus' story of the so-called hero that claims to be the only one that knows where the city of ants exists and chains everyone, that dots his words to a rock, i.e. the ant-heap. So it's kind of like sending people to the gulag to rethink until they find the right answer. So authoritarianism, basically. It results in authoritarianism and oppression. Now, so in short, despite its metaphysical good intentions to revolt against the absurd, rebellions don't always lead to constructive change. It makes it destructive or a nihilistic form of rebellion. Believing in a utopia, rebelling for a utopia, makes the rebellion a destructive or a nihilistic form of rebellion. And that is what we want to avoid. So, to conclude, what is the moral of the story here? What is a lesson we can learn? To avoid nihilistic rebellions that do not result in constructive change, we must avoid replacing God with a utopia and committing philosophical suicide by seeking to achieve the impossible. And we must only seek for genuine rebellions that are founded on solidarity and therefore inherently have restrictions to political violence. Otherwise, the kingdom of humanity ceases to exist and the empire of objects takes over. Those are complicated words, so let me explain it a bit. In other words, people would stop being bound by ties of affection due to solidarity, and they would be united by mutual accusations instead. Because killing a human is inherently disruptive to solidarity, since it contradicts our very own being as human beings in the kingdom of humanity. Therefore, a genuine rebellion recognizes the rights and freedoms of other humans that is bound by the chains of solidarity. Now, to conclude my presentation here, here's a question. Is it even possible to have a genuine rebellion isn't a genuine rebellion a utopia in itself? So isn't it paradoxical? The presentation ends here, but I do answer this question. So if you'd like, you can pause, have a quick discussion, and then get back and hear the answer. And so here's the answer. Well, yes, it does, in fact, contradict Camus. It is, in fact, a utopia in itself. The only genuine rebellion that can be achieved is, in fact, only a metaphysical rebellion, and not a historical or materialized rebellion, which renders Camus' thinking on rebellions and the meaning of life limited only to an abstract thought and not possible to realize in the physical world. Okay, I hope it was useful and you learned some stuff. It was a joy for me, so the presentation ends here. Thank you for listening.